Hi Scouts. Today we're going to talk about some of the tools that you need to become familiar with to be successful in the outdoors. Knowing how to use these tools correctly will help you greatly in your scouting adventures. Now the tools that you will learn about over the next few weeks are all related to rope and include knots and lashings, as well as how to maintain the ends of your rope with whipping and fusing. So why is it important to learn how to use rope and to be able to tie knots and lashings? There are many examples of where we use these tools as part of our scouting adventures. So for example, on a camp out, maybe you want to put a clothesline up into the ridge of your tent to hang your clothes on. Maybe you need to put a tarp up over an area to keep you dry. Or maybe you need to repair a broken guy line on a tent. When we took our trip to Maine last summer, we went canoeing for 4 days. Every day we had to tie our gear into the canoes in the morning so that it wouldn't fall out in case the canoe tipped. That was very important because we actually did tip a canoe over, and because the gear was tied into the canoe properly, we didn't lose anything. Every evening we had to take the gear out of the canoe and tie up our canoes overnight so they wouldn't float away. And we did our cooking over a campfire every day, rain or shine. So we needed to put a large tarp up above the campfire and attach it with ropes to trees to keep the cooking area dry. All of these situations required the scouts to know how to use rope and to be able to tie knots. When we add in poles and sticks to make some kind of a structure, like the jail that we make at the Bluegrass Festival every year, or a shelter that you could sleep in, then you have to know how to do lashings. So let's talk about the type of ropes. So really there's two types. There's natural fiber and there's synthetic. So starting with the natural fiber, as the name implies, this is made out of fibers that occur in nature. So this is made out of plant fibers. There's 4 common kinds of this you'll see. There's manila, which is what this is. There's sisal, there's jute, and there's hemp. Going over to the synthetic, so really this is man-made material. So this is actually made out of a sort of plastic. One thing to note on both of these ropes though is that we're taking care of the ends so they don't unravel. So you can see on the natural fiber rope here we have some whipping, and on the synthetic we have the ends fused so they don't unravel. So what makes a good knot? There are 3 things. It needs to be easy to tie, it needs to stay tied, and it needs to be easy to untie. So if we start with probably the first knot you all learned how to tie, a square knot. It's very easy to tie. So I'm going left over right and right over left. Now it stays tied, but just as importantly, when I'm done with this knot, it's very easy to untie it. That's very important. So if you spend a lot of time tying things up and make them very secure, but then it takes you an hour to get it untied because you have a mess and you didn't tie good knots, then those knots were not very useful. So why are we learning to tie knots? So it's not just for rank advancement. We're really learning to tie these because on our scouting trips, we want to apply these knots in useful ways to help us out. So I'm going to show you an example of how you might do that on a trip. So there's our water bottle, something that every one of you should have with you on all of our trips because it's important to stay hydrated. One of the things we like to do is go canoeing. So if you've ever been canoeing, you have your water bottle, you take a drink, you set it down the bottom of the canoe, and as you're paddling down the river, the water bottle slides away. Then when you need to get a drink later, you can't reach it. So somehow we need to secure this in the canoe. Most of them, unfortunately, do not have cup holders. So how can we do that? So what I've done is I've taken a short piece of paracord and put a couple of knots on either end. These are just bowlines. Now that I've done that, I can run my rope through the water bottle. I can take a carabiner, and when you're paddling your canoe, either right in front of you or right behind you, you're going to have a thwart. If you're not sure what a thwart is, you should look that up in your scout handbook. It's under parts of a canoe, but all you need to do is clip that around the thwart, and now your water bottle is handy and it's not going to roll away. It's easy to take it out and get a drink when you're thirsty. So tying a great knot is step 1, but you need to tie the right kind of knot for the situation. So tying a good knot but the wrong kind of knot is just as bad as tying a bad knot to start with. So let me give you an example. So say you're doing something like climbing and you need to tie a rope around your waist for safety in case you fall. So you probably would use some kind of a hitch. So I could start out with, so we can pretend that this broomstick handle is your waist. And maybe we're gonna tie a hitch, and we decide we're gonna tie 2 half hitches. So I'm gonna tie my 2 half hitches. So I have those, I'm gonna dress them up. And this is easier for you to do because I'm doing this sideways. So I have my 2 half hitches. Another hitch I might use is a bowline. So let's see if I can tie a bowline here. So I have both of these. They're both good knots. They're both tied around your waist, but which is the right one to use? So if I were to slip and fall, my bowline is going to grab me. If I slipped and fell with my 2 half hitches, it's going to cinch up around my waist and probably cut off the circulation. That would be very painful. So in this situation, it's probably better to use something like this than something like this. And actually in climbing, you're probably going to use something called a double figure 8, which is another kind of hitch, but it works in a similar way in that it won't tighten around your waist. Now the first thing you want to do for this advancement challenge is to get your Scout Handbook out, go to the chapter on tools, and read the sections related to rope, knots, and lashings. Now the rank requirements you'll be working on, if you're working on Scout, you need to learn how to tie a square knot, 2 half hitches, and a taut line, explain how these knots are used, and then show proper care of rope by learning how to whip and fuse the ends. For tenderfoot, you're going to take those same 3 knots and you're going to demonstrate a practical use of them. You're also going to use the edge method to teach somebody else how to tie a square knot. For second class, we're going to add in 2 more knots. You need to learn how to tie the sheep bend and the bowline and describe a situation in which you would use these knots. For first class, you're going to discuss when you should and should not use lashings. You're going to demonstrate how to tie 2 more knots, the timber hitch and the clove hitch, and then you're going to learn about tying square, shear, and diagonal lashings to join 2 or more poles together and demonstrate that. And then use those skills and with lashings to make a useful camp gadget or structure. So one of the things you need to learn about is the terminology that is used when we're talking about knots and lashings. This is the language of knots and lashings. So starting with this, the end of the rope that you're working with is called the running end or the working end, or sometimes called the bitter end. The opposite end of the rope is the standing part of it, the standing end. If you bend a rope back upon itself like this is called a bight. If you do it all the way around and cross itself, it's called a loop. The difference between the overhand and the underhand is where the working end of the rope is. So if the working end goes over top of the standing end, it's called an overhand loop. If the working end goes underneath the standing end, it's called an underhand loop. If I wrap the rope around an object and continue on, it's called a turn. If I wrap it around and come back the way I started, it's called a round turn. Now there's really only 2 types of knots you're going to learn about. If we have a rope tied to another rope, that type of knot is called a bend. So here we have a square knot tying 2 ropes together. The other type is called a hitch. This is when a knot is used to tie a rope to another object. So here we have a clove hitch. For lashings, there's some terminology we need to learn about as well. So here I have a picture of a tripod lashing. When I wrap the rope around the poles, it's called a wrap. So this is a turn of the rope around the poles. You can see that portion of the lashing is a wrap. And then I take the rope and I turn it between the poles around the wraps, it's called a frap. And this area is the frap. The frap is important because that's what we use to tighten up the lashing and to make it secure. So one of the tools you can use to help you learn how to tie knots and lashings is the Animated Knots website. So I'm going to show you how to access that and how to use the tool. So if you go to our troop website, go up under the menu and go to Resources, Resource Links. There's lots of cool links here that you could click on, but the only one is right at the top. It's called Animated Knots. Once you go into this website, it has a lot of information about knots and lashings. What we want to do is go under Knots by Activity and pick Scouting. Now this is going to show you all the knots and lashings you need to learn how to tie for scouting. It's also going to show you a lot of extra ones. So if you learn all the basic ones, you can always learn some more by going to this website. So let's pick on one of these. For example, the bowline. So what this is going to do, it's going to step through tying the knot. And you can replay this, so it will continue automatically through every step. You can change the speed if you want to go faster, or if you want to go really slow. You can even step through it one step at a time by clicking these arrows and go backward and forward. This is very useful. The other thing that's nice about this website is you can flip the orientation of the knot. So if you're doing it left-handed and you want to see how to do it right-hand, you can just flip it. Or if in this case the loop is toward you, you can make it this way and the loop is going away from you. So you have a lot of options, and this will help you learn how to tie the various scouting knots and lashings that you need to learn how to tie. So to wrap up today, you should look for videos coming out in the upcoming days that will teach you how to tie specific knots, how to do lashings, and how to whip and fuse ropes. You can use those videos to learn how to tie the knots that you need to learn how to tie. You can also use the Animated Knots website. You can use your Scout Handbook, and I'll also send out some step-by-step instructions on how to tie each knot. At home, if you don't have rope, you can always practice with shoelaces or string. And when you need to tie the rope up to an object, you could tie it to a tree, a post, a chair or table leg, even a stair rail. So, be safe, but practice tying some knots at home.